Hare Krishna. I'm here with Akrura. This is Reality Check, and we are talking about the mind,
Hare
our
Krishna.
best friend, or our greatest enemy. It's interesting, in the Bhagavatam, Prabhupada says you cannot trust the mind, meaning the conditioned mind. Of course, if you're Krishna conscious, you could trust the mind. So one of the practices for devotees, and even for non-devotees, because they have the same problem. The mind, we talked about self-sabotage, the mind can work against us, which is kind of strange. We have this enemy within us that's always trying to undermine what we're doing.
Not only undermine, but also push us to do things that will bring us suffering, and telling us things that are actually putting us more in ignorance and getting us into trouble. So we have to learn how to control the mind. That's the part of yoga. And the mind has to be engaged in a positive way. Like Srila Prabhupada says, just like a child, you cannot just take away the toy from the child. You have to give him something else. Similarly, the mind has to be engaged in doing something positive and thinking about things that are beneficial. And in this way, the mind can be controlled.
It's so important. Prabhupada said we should always be straining our brain how to spread the Krishna consciousness movement. And he said that's the best way to control the mind. Because, as we know, that saying, an idle mind is what? What kind of workshop?
The devil's workshop.
So what's the devil? Lust, anger, greed, envy, matsara, moha. These qualities, Prabhupada writes, they exist within the mind. That's where they reside. So that means potentially they can come out and attempt to destroy us or successfully destroy us. And the essential quality of a devotee is his concern for other people, his compassion. And even non-devotees recognize that a person who's unhappy, they need to help other people because they get so self-absorbed. So part of what the mind's doing is just making us self-absorbed. You want this, you don't like this person, whatever it is that's taking us away from Krishna consciousness. I not only see, but I understand that all thoughts carry energy. So what is the result of negative thoughts? It's this negative energy. And where does that negative energy take us? It takes us away from Krishna. We see, if we have negative thoughts, we don't want to do something. We talked about this, being positive, fake it till you make it. If you have negative thoughts about something, your whole body can become weakened by it. Your whole body can become tired. And if you have positive thoughts, you become energized. So the mind is very powerful. It has this tremendous physical effect on us.
The mind is powerful, and the mind is, according to Bhagavad Gita, it's higher than the senses. But Bhagavad Gita says intelligence is higher than the mind, and the soul is higher than intelligence. So our intelligence, if it's chaste, then it can control the mind. If it's properly fixed, if it's like Sthita D. Yesterday I met a devotee, Sthita D Muni. So Sthita D means the fixed intelligence fixed in Krishna consciousness. So if our intelligence is spiritualized, then we can control the mind.
I think what's really important, at least what I found in my life, because sometimes we have our minds well controlled. It may be because the intelligence is sharp. It may be because our chanting is better than normal. We may be reading steadily, regularly. Maybe we're writing. Maybe we're doing the things that keep our intelligence very sharp. And in those situations, controlling the mind seems like not even an issue. It's just naturally controlled. I think the problem that most of us face, or the biggest problem that we face in dealing with the mind, is those times when that's not happening. Of course, you can never guarantee, even if you can be reading and chanting and doing everything, and still the mind may be disturbing you. So how do we deal in those situations in which the mind is pulling And one of the most important things that I've found in my Krishna consciousness is this very statement where Prabhupada says, he gives the example, if a hunter captures an animal, he shouldn't let the animal out of the trap thinking the animal was just going to stay there because he's been captured. He said, in the same way, when you capture your mind, you shouldn't let it out of the trap. You shouldn't trust it. You can't trust it. So, within that context, he's basically saying, you can't trust it, but at the same time, you need to learn how to neglect it. Because in those times when intelligence is not clear, and the mind becomes very strong, and it's like having somebody living with you, talking to you all the time. You should do this, you should do this, you should do this. You don't like that person. Why don't you go tell them? Tell somebody else you don't like them. And you really want this. And oh, look at that girl, look at that guy. There, you really want to be with them. So the mind is talking, it's pulling. What do we do? One of the greatest insights that I've understood is that connect with your heart, connect with your sincerity, connect with what you want, what your real intention is, and distinguish that intention from what the mind is saying. And the more you can distinguish it, the more you can distinguish yourself from the mind and become detached. And the Prabhupada's saying, don't listen. But how could you not listen unless you say, no, I'm a devotee, I don't want these things. This is not what I want. The mind says I want it. That's another issue. And oftentimes what happens is we merge the two and we can't separate them because we don't see ourselves and our heart and our intention and our innermost desires as separate from the mind. If we're devotees, they must be. They definitely are. The conditioned mind is in a different world. And if we can separate ourselves from that conditioned mind and just think, it's just the mind, I don't have to listen to it. This is where my heart is. My heart is in bhakti. That's an invaluable tool. And then we don't have to become so concerned, oh, my mind, my mind. Yes, the mind, whatever. But where is your heart? Follow that.
So the mind, you said in one of your courses, I remember, that you can tell your mind, thank you for sharing. When mind says something, we don't have to take it so seriously. And there is these three functions of the mind: thinking, feeling, and willing. And we can actually train ourselves to choose what we think, to choose how we feel, and to choose what we desire.
There's a real interesting point regarding choice. We actually think according to the analogies that we see, through which we see the world. And so, like for example, we see this material world as a prison, and the punishment is old age, birth, old age, disease, and death. That's an analogy. We see the world as a place of misery. Someone else may see this world as paradise. That's their analogy. This world is meant for enjoyment. Every moment and everything in this world is meant for enjoyment. So you can see by the kind of analogy through which they see the world, they'll operate, and therefore the thoughts will follow the analogies. In Krishna consciousness, we have the analogy: every man sees every woman as mother, every woman sees every man as son. That's an analogy. In popular culture, women are sex symbols. We don't see them as mother. The analogy is the woman is there for my enjoyment. So analogies are very powerful, and we have to look at our analogies and see the lenses through which we see the world, because that's having tremendous effect upon what we think. And you're saying choices. We can choose what to think, so we can also choose analogies. And then if you go a step further, you can look at beliefs which are causing thoughts. Like I teach in my forgiveness class. If you believe someone has to apologize before you can forgive them, then your thought about forgiveness, you won't be able to forgive that person until they apologize. And they may never apologize. And you may look at that and think, that's not going to help me, so I need to change my belief. If I change my belief that I can forgive them without them apologizing, it changes the way I think about resentment. So beliefs affect the way we think. So there are ways we can make these choices on even more subtle levels. And also when you're talking about compassion, the heart of a devotee, by carrying that heart with us, that compassionate heart, that tremendously changes the way we relate to things and people of this world and the whole process of how we're thinking.
Very important aspect of controlling the mind is to catch the mind when it starts to torture us, when it starts to beat us up, when it starts to make us feel very, very bad about ourselves and about what we have done and what we have said and like that. That's self-sabotage or self-torture at its peak. So one can start actually practicing and catching the mind when the mind starts its usual torture, and then just don't make a conscious effort to stop that and don't allow the mind to torture us.
So what's the opposite of torture? Massage?
Well, you can, if you make a mistake, for example, you can stop and say, okay, I made a mistake, so I can learn something from this mistake. And we had a whole session about questions, and questions are a very powerful way to control the mind, because the questions that we ask ourselves influence our thinking, and thinking is one of the most important functions of the mind. So if we ask ourselves good questions, okay, what's the best way to deal with this now? I forgot my glasses and I'm not going to be able to do my work on the computer, so what's the best way to do? Instead of being very upset with myself for 2 hours, I can actually either go back and be a little late for my work, or I can go there and borrow glasses from somebody and do something to just correct the mistake and not lament and beat myself up about it for 2 hours.
I also like to think, in line with what you're saying, logical conclusions. If I'm thinking a certain way, what's the logical conclusion? Where's that thinking going to take me? So if you step back from your thoughts, you're saying, okay, these thoughts are torturing us. Well, if you look at your thoughts and you think, this thought is torturing me, why do I want to meditate on a torturous thought? Well, that just makes no sense. And where is that thought taking me? For number one, it's already taken me into some miserable state. And if I keep thinking that way, it's going to take me into a more miserable state. And so there's this huge paradox of how we're attached to thinking about something which is causing us misery. And there's something in there that we're getting from it, some kind of perverted pleasure.
Yes.
So
pleasure is there.
If we, that's our conditioning. We're so conditioned. It's like the pig likes the taste of stool. So we're, I think it was Raghunath Goswami, he said, pride is like bathing in donkey urine. So we're getting some pleasure, somehow or other. You think, how can a person get pleasure from bathing in donkey urine? It doesn't make sense. So some thoughts are like donkey urine, and then we're bathing in this donkey urine, and we're thinking, oh, this is really nice. This is great. So if we look at that, and we'll immediately realize, no, I don't think bathing in donkey urine is really something I should be doing. It's really not advantageous to my Krishna consciousness. And so we get a sense of that. And then there's a saying, as you think it, so you are. You become what you think about most of the time. And you hear that in the world of self-development, and of course that's the basic principle of Bhagavad Gita. And in our evolution in Krishna consciousness, we are meant to evolve more and more around this principle. We'll always remember Krishna, never forget him, and every rule and regulation is meant to support that. And so if we're in that frame of reference, when we're looking at these negative thoughts and seeing where it's taking us, and we get our frame of reference clear, then immediately we can come to this point. Well, I'm supposed to be absorbed in thoughts of Krishna. I'm supposed to evolve that way in my life, to be more and more absorbed in thinking of Krishna, because I'm going to become what I'm thinking about.
If in the Bhagavad Gita purport, Srila Prabhupada says that if you think of Krishna your whole life, you will get the spiritual body, you will get the body as Krishna's. And also, we need to train our mind to think about things that are favorable for devotional service. Two functions of the mind are sankalpa and vikalpa, accepting and rejecting. So we can choose, because intelligence is stronger than the mind, it's higher than the mind, and the soul is higher than the mind. So we can train ourselves to choose what is favorable. And also, I was working with devotees who were extremely negative about themselves. Their mind is always torturing them, telling them, "You are bad, your life is finished, you've done so many mistakes, there is no hope." And then I said, I did one exercise in self-awareness. I said, please imagine you are not yourself, you are somebody else. Actually, I asked them that you are your best friend, and you're coming to that person that is you. What do you see? And what would you tell this person? And gradually, that devotee became so friendly towards himself that came up with wonderful ideas how to live his life and how to improve his life.
I find it so amazing that we come into this world carrying the seeds of destruction within our own heart.
You mean self-destruction?
Self-destruction, spiritual suicide. We talked about this, and I always find it amazing. And as you're saying, we have to reason with ourselves. So, okay, I have this side of me. There's a side of me that wants to self-destruct. So I have to reason with that. And we have, in our own tradition, we have the prayers of
Acharyas.
Of Govindadas, when he's praying to the mind. Bhajahure mana. So you think, okay, this, someone is talking to themselves. Generally, people talk to themselves or have clinical mental illnesses. So here, but talking to yourself, if you reason with yourself, it's very powerful. I did this one exercise in one seminar I did, and it has always helped me to this day. And it's a form of reasoning. And one of the ways I help devotee reason is I say, look at something which is really a big problem for you in your Krishna consciousness. Just look at it. And imagine it were not there in your life. It just was gone. You didn't have that. What would your life be like? And everybody could see, well, if I didn't have that problem, my life would be so much better. When I did it to myself, I thought, well, if I didn't have this one problem, I would be about 5,000 times more Krishna conscious than I am now.
Yeah.
So obviously doing that made an impact. And so, of course, the mind wants to go towards that problem because that's a big obstacle for me.
Almost likes it.
Yeah, it lives there sometimes. So when it goes there, then that self-talk, say, okay, I've thought this out. I really looked at this. And I realize going there is one of the most disastrous things that I can be doing right now.
Against yourself.
Against myself. So I really like this idea of self-talk, of reasoning, looking at reason. This happens often when you write, you reason. So you can do that if you're not writing, you can do that just by questioning yourself, having this conversation. And so Govindadas is doing that. He's reasoning with his mind. He said, look at, you serve wicked men, you become wicked. Look at this, life is like a drop on a lotus leaf. Why are you so attached? Why are you doing these things? He's asking himself questions. He's asking his mind questions. So it's a bona fide process. It's not some psycho New Age therapy. Govindadas is doing. He's reasoning with himself. It's sharpening the intelligence.
Is Raghunath Das Goswami wrote Manak Shiksha?
I believe so.
The instructions to the mind. So Acharyas also instruct the mind. So in our tradition, all the Acharyas, they are teaching us to be very, very vigilant and very vigorous and work on controlling the mind. It's a hard work. It's maybe the hardest work that we have to do in our life. And how much time do we spend on learning about how to do it, on applying these things? And that's also, I think, that coaching is good. But coaching forces you or induces you to think deeply, to actually work with your mind in such a way that your mind becomes a friend.
Another powerful way I find personally in dealing with the mind is to look at our lives and look what's going on in our lives, what comes into our lives, and realize that what's happening we've created from our minds. I look at renunciates, people who've been able to keep strict vows, their initiation vows, and particularly sannyasis who've been very strict. And I look at them and I think, in their minds, there is little attraction to the opposite sex, and therefore those allurements or those kinds of things don't come into their life. They're not attracting that. Sometimes we can attract these things because we're attached to them. We attract them into our lives. So, in the opposite way, when we're attached to things, things start showing up. So oftentimes, these big obstacles and challenges come to us because we're actually attached to them, and Krishna's fulfilling our desire, and they show up, and we think, Krishna, why did you have to put this in front of me? And Krishna's saying, because this is what you're meditating on. You're attracting this into your life. So it's a powerful realization to look at our life and think, okay, what's ever going on, good or bad, I'm creating by my thoughts. So what's distinguishing me from another person who's more successful or less successful? It's how we're thinking. And to understand the kind of thinking of advanced devotees, their attitudes, how they look at things, how they deal with situations, how they bring in so much Krishna consciousness into their life and Krishna conscious opportunities, it's because of their thinking, their desire, their attitude.
One thing that happens in the mind is feeling, emotions. So sometimes people think that spiritual life is actually very dry and there is no emotions. But as we see in the scriptures like Bhagavatam, Chaitanya Charitamrita, and even the Bhagavad Gita, spiritual life is full of emotions, and there is so much intense emotion there. So we also have to learn how to deal with our emotions. And I mentioned this before, that you can instantaneously change the way you feel if you change your posture, if you change the physiology, I would say. So I'm asking devotees to raise their hands and to try to be frustrated in that position, but it's impossible. So we can affect the way you feel even by the physical movement, what to speak if we consciously make an effort. And so this is also a huge area that is sometimes very difficult to deal with, because emotions come spontaneously, and then you are thinking, how can I control my emotions? They just come spontaneously. I spontaneously become happy, I spontaneously become sad, so it just comes and goes. I don't know where it comes from.
Well, sometimes also our physical state is affecting our emotional or mental state, which is all the more of the reason to be able to control them. And I wanted to say something, this is so important, about emotion. There's another way of dealing with emotion also, because here we're talking about thoughts that we don't want, and a lot of times they're just there. Once they're there, what do? How do you deal with it? Particularly emotions are more charged than thoughts, because from thoughts come emotions, and now instead of thinking it, we're feeling it. And one thing which is not so intuitive for many devotees is that if you have an emotion, even if that emotion is not Krishna conscious, just feel it and face it. And you say, why should I feel that? It's not Krishna conscious. Because a lot of times what you're doing is suppressing it, you're avoiding it, you're not dealing with it. And by feeling it, you can actually work through it, because emotion is sometimes described, emotion is energy in motion, and it needs to come out. For example, in my forgiveness seminar, I let devotees talk. I let them talk about how they were hurt. And I tell them, I say, could you imagine if after you told your story about how you were hurt, I asked you to tell it again? And every time you told it, at the end of the story, I asked you to tell it again. And this went on for hours. How would you feel? And they say, I'd feel sick of telling the story. And what else would you feel? I would feel this story is pretty stupid and boring, and I never want to tell it again.
Wow.
So a lot of times what's happening is you're allowing the feelings and emotions to just process out of you, like in the Bhagavatam it said that Daksha was mad at Narada Muni, and Narada Muni just listened to him because it allowed Daksha to just process it. And I had this amazing experience where I was feeling really guilty when I wouldn't get up early in the morning and do the whole morning program. So one morning I was up early in the morning, and I went with that feeling. Normally I would just try to avoid it, and I say, well, I don't want to feel that because it's just a negative feeling. It's not pleasant. So I went with a feeling, feeling bad that I wasn't up early. And then I realized at that point that by doing that, I came to the conclusion that the guilt felt a lot worse than whatever it took to rise early in the morning. So by allowing myself to feel it, it actually helped me process it. So that's why I'm saying a lot of times when you have the negative, whether it's talking about it to your mind, or feeling how bad you feel, like sometimes you may be thinking something horrible. You can just stop and go, like if you're talking to yourself, say, Mahatma, how do you feel right now thinking about this? And you say, I feel horrible. So why are you thinking about it? So if you actually allow yourself to feel it in your body, you'll feel so bad that immediately you'll think, yeah, this is crazy. I don't want to feel this way. I don't want to think this way.
Why do you choose to feel like that?
Yeah. So we generally kind of program ourselves not to feel negative emotions because we think it's going to take us away from Krishna consciousness. But often, by confronting them, we can dissipate them just by connecting with how bad we feel or how detrimental those emotions can be to us. So like sometimes we're told emotions are there to teach us. There's something you can learn from them. And if you just suppress and avoid them, you may not learn the lesson.
So one thing is that you, as I hear from what you say, is that you are very diligent in working with yourself and with your emotions and on yourself. And Prabhupada would quote this saying that God helps those who help themselves. So we have to work on these things. If we are lazy to work on these things, or work on the mind, work on our emotions, work on our thinking, then it will be very difficult for us to progress. So self-realization means actually hard work on yourself.
One of the big realizations I had at the Japa retreat, when we deal with the process of hearing, focusing, I realized if I don't give 100% of my energy to hearing, to focusing my mind, I lose the battle. And when I say 100% of my energy, I mean every ounce of energy I have beyond what I need to stand or sit and move my mouth, every ounce of energy left has to go to controlling my mind. Otherwise, if I become lazy, the mind, takes
over.
Yeah, it's like it's definitely a battle. But the other thing we find is that when you do that and you start to win, the winning becomes a habit, and then you can kind of click back into the positive mode more quickly.
Yes.
And so it becomes more of your default setting. Just as the negative may have been your default setting, why not create a default setting of positive? Because, as we're saying, your life is just the result of your thoughts. Obviously, positive, enthusiastic people with good attitudes, their life's going to be different than someone who's always looking down, always depressed, discouraged, looking at the bad side of themselves. And you were making that point about looking at ourselves in terms of the good that's there. And we talked about this the other day, and Prabhupada always saw the good. He always fanned the spark, whatever spark was there in the individual. And I think it's important for us to do the same, to look at, well, what are the qualities I can use? What are the attributes that I have that are positive in Krishna consciousness? Let me capitalize on them. As much as I'm trying to minimize on the negative, let me capitalize on the positive. And that will help me even more in minimizing the negative. And obviously, Prabhupada said everyone is useful in Krishna service. We all have something we can do.
So become a positive thinker, positive feeler, and positive desirer.
We're different persons. Some people are naturally more positive, some people are not. Some people, by their nature, by their karma, they're going to have a greater time, a more difficult time being positive. And what I would say to them is, I would say, just acknowledge that maybe by your personality or your upbringing, you're not this super positive person. Jai, go Ranga, let's get out there, save the world. That's not your nature. You're happy if you just get out of bed and don't become totally depressed today. That's your persona, that's your nature. So recognize, for you, you're going to have to do more work than the naturally positive person. And I think this is where a lot of devotees get into trouble, because they'll see devotees that either through their past devotional activities have so many good qualities, or through some kind of past samskars, they're just positive people. Certain people are extremely determined, they're fighters. They'll never say no, they'll never be defeated, they're competitive. And they approach Maya that way. Maya's not going to defeat me. I will not let her defeat me. So But not everybody's like that. And so when we see those that are like that, and then we see, well, I'm not like that, we can just think, well, I should just give up. No, what we should think is, for me, if that's the way I am, I have to try harder. Or if we see in a particular area where we're very attached, where we have difficulty with our mind, say that area, that's where I have to try harder. Otherwise, it's so easy to give up because we look at other people and say, look at him, look at her. They're naturally like this. They naturally have these qualities. Okay, that may be true to some degree. I don't think it's true entirely because everybody has to work on their Krishna consciousness. Everyone has to work on developing good qualities, practicing Krishna consciousness. But what is true, all of us have certain weaknesses and certain strengths. So if we can play to our strengths and then realize that we're going to have to work harder with our weaknesses and try to use our strengths to help conquer our weaknesses, then we can be positive even if we are that so-called negative person.
We have been speaking about thinking, about feeling, and let's speak a little bit about desires. How to deal with our desires. You have any thoughts on that?
I think the essence, which we touched upon, is the heart. What is the heart of a devotee? Because the heart is the seed of consciousness. What is the heart of a devotee? And if we look at the heart of the devotee, if we study the qualities, we see central to the heart of the devotee is compassion, is his ability to live outside his world and live in the world of others, to go into the world of others who feel pain, even though you may not feel pain yourself. You may be happy in Krishna consciousness, but to get out of your world into the world of others and empathize, not see the world just through your eyes, but empathize, or empathize whatever suffering you've had in your life with what you hear and see from them, and empathize from their situation, and show concern and make the effort to help people. And that is the real heart or real desire of a devotee. And then around that, if you say that's the hub of the wheel, around that you see forgiveness, tolerance, you see empathy, you see humility, you see all these good qualities. And then when we look at that, we say, oh my God, I don't have those qualities. What do I do? The key is practice. You don't have them. We don't expect that you have them. If you had them, why would you be in the material world? How did you end up in the material world if you already had all those qualities? You wouldn't be here. So the key is to practice. I don't have them, but I can practice being compassionate. I can practice being tolerant. I can practice being humble. And so those are all core qualities to the heart of a devotee. And that it changes the very nature of what's going on at the deepest level of our heart, because we're practicing the core qualities of a pure devotee. What's your view on dealing with desire?
Well, in coaching, I often ask devotees, what do you want? And sometimes they say, I don't know what I want. And then I tell them, well, you can choose what you want. You can want this or you can want that. You can want Krishna or you can want Maya. You can choose to want to preach, and you can choose to want to watch TV and lament. So I think it's our responsibility to choose wisely what we desire. And of course we are naturally attracted to something and we desire it, like sense objects in the material world. But at the same time we have to learn that what's favorable or what's beneficial to desire and what will bring suffering, what kind of desire will bring suffering. So it also boils down to training and responsibly choosing what we want. And coaching basically boils down to 3 questions. What do you want? What are you going to do about it? And when? And once you are clear about what you want, then there is no limit to how much you can achieve. Krishna can help you. And so if you tell me, I want this, I don't believe you until I see what you do. Say, I would really like to become a great musician. So what does that mean? It means a lot of hard work, rehearsals, getting good instruments, getting in touch with the right people, making CDs, recording sometimes with difficult people, appearing everywhere, having live gigs, being in the newspaper, doing interviews. So are you doing all these things? no, I'm just playing guitar for myself at my home. So how can you become a famous musician if you just do that?
The whole realm of what do you want sometimes is, at least for some devotees, it seems almost to be a thought or a question that has nothing to do with Krishna consciousness, because
Okay.
the principle of Krishna consciousness is, what does Guru want, what does Krishna want, and whatever Guru wants, whatever Krishna wants, I want. And that, as you were speaking, I was thinking, in the early days of the movement, Prabhupada told us before he leaves the planet, he wants to open 108 temples. And then when he went to India, he said, I want to open big temples in all the major cities of India. And then once he came to Los Angeles, and he asked them about book publication, and he said, I want to finish the Chaitanya Charitamrita within a specified time, within a month or two. And then, so if you look at Prabhupada's desires, you see they were very strong and very specific of what he wanted to achieve. And obviously his desire was to translate as many books as possible. And I went through Prabhupada's letters in the 50s, and I found that Prabhupada revealed, he said, my desire is that every person in the world become Krishna conscious.
Ooh.
So of course, that was a global desire. And so when we ask a devotee, what do you desire, we perhaps can rephrase it in the sense, within the global framework of making everyone in the world Krishna conscious and making yourself Krishna conscious, which Prabhupada said are the two duties of the devotee. Those are the two prime duties. How do you fit, and where is the intensity, of attraction, where do you resonate the most? Because Akrura's point is, when you resonate with that in itself can overpower so many negative desires. You say, well, I shouldn't desire anything but exactly what I'm told to do, and this and that. That may be to a certain degree, but at the same time you may be battling with your mind because you're so disconnected from what could really inspire you to go out and help even more people. And when you're doing that and you're connected with that, the tendency for the negativity, the conditioned negativity, to bother you is weakened, tremendously weakened. It often doesn't become a problem anymore. So thank you for listening. If you want to get in touch with us, you can contact Akrura at pamho.net and vedicilluminations.com/Gita coaching. If you want to contact me, you can contact me at mahat@AOL or